Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today, we're talking about what it would take for Konami to unban all of Zodiac. This is an archetype that some people love, some people hate. It is one of the Tier 0 decks in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, but it still has 4 different cards on the ban list. And coming from somebody who basically missed the train entirely on Zodiac, by the time I got back into Yu-Gi-Oh, it was like 2018 already, and Zodiac was getting its like final bans to basically make it unplayable until, you know, Dryden got unbanned a couple years ago, saw a little play in Tri Brigade, got quickly rebanned again, and during that time that deck saw a little bit of like rogue play as like a cool, like even Zodiac Pure as a going second deck that could just pump out ZOOS really easily and consistently. But other than that, that's basically all I have. I've always looked at a lot of the pieces Zodiac have, and I thought it looks so cool, really fun, like mid-range deck you can play. But it still has too many cards, and so it's not playable enough. So the basis on today's video is what would Konami have to do in terms of errataing certain Zodiac cards, or just being worried about some of the pieces that kind of are new, that like Zodiac couldn't even use in the past and they had to ban everything, and now there's even more tools that allow them to be extra crazy in modern day. That's what we're talking about here. So let's just get into this thing, right? Let's go over quickly the 4 cards that are still on the ban list at this current moment in time that we need to really worry about. The first one is Broad Bull. I think at this point, Broad Bull is probably the craziest card on the ban list. I think the biggest thing right now is that this card is just not once per turn. He is a rank 4, actually fully generic too, but in Zodiac even easier to make. He only basically takes 1 material. Once per turn, detach material from this card to add any Beast Warrior monster that can be normal summoned or set. So that's not even just restricted to Zodiac. There's an argument they should restrict that to only Zodiac monsters as well, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Biggest thing though, not once per turn. That's huge. Zodiac Dryden. This is another card that I could have argued years ago. I argued 2 years ago when they not 2 years ago, like over a year ago when they rebanned this card. That was not the correct move. It always should have been the Samorg Link, and they still ended up having to hit Samorg Link after this because this proved not to be the reason that deck was too good. Again, not once per turn, and since the deck can like put this card on the field like 3 separate times in a turn, like without that much stress, I kind of do like the idea of making this a hard once per turn, especially if you had plans of releasing this card past 1. You know what I mean? That way, like the deck wouldn't be able to just kind of even hard make a second or third one all in one turn, right? I don't want Zodiac to be able to make a board where technically they can end on 3 separate live Dryadens and pass. That's a little overkill for me, but if it's hard once per turn, it keeps that in check just enough for me. Next up, Zodiac Barrage. I think this card's fine, actually. I think this card's a really, really, really great engine card for the deck, but it's hard once per turn, So yeah, like yes, it is kind of just knee telly for a deck that gets a lot of value out of 1 body on the field, but it's really the only card in the entire archetype that allows you to play outside of your normal summon, basically. So I'm totally cool on this card. I think this card could probably come back right now, the way it is. And lastly, we have Zodiac Rap here. This is the only card that is not fully banned. This card's actually only at 1 on the ban list. It has 2 really good effects. On normal summon, it Foolish Rails a Zodiac card from Wreck to Grave. That is very useful, as in most archetypes in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! But the other effect is really what makes this card really, really broken. So while it's a material for a Beast Warrior Exceed monster, once per turn you can attach a material from that monster to special summon another Rap here from your deck. Again, not once per turn. I cannot believe some of these cards are not once per turn. For like even 2017 time, I would have expected more of these cards to be hard OPT. But that's my biggest problem with this card, is the fact that you could like especially if you could technically like reset your Rat Peers back into the deck with something like Daigusto Emerald, which is legal again, right? But being able to just continually reborn this card, make it into another Zodiac, Exceed, summon again. I understand being able to summon one Rat Pure from deck. That just makes this card really good. But keeping it from being like insanely broken where you can just loop it over and over again, I think I'd feel much more comfortable if this card was at least a hard one's return on that second effect. That's what we need there. All right, so those are the 4 cards. Kind of a lot to work through because all of these cards are probably, banned for a good reason, more or less. But I think there's a lot of people that would like really enjoy playing Zoodiac, and I think if these cards were checked in the appropriate manner, I don't think this deck would be crazy. By the way, I think it's okay if Zoodiac is tier 1 again. I don't even necessarily think they would get there with some of the hits I'm going to propose here. But like, tier 1 is fine with how fast power creep is coming recently. Like, that wouldn't even last super, super long anyway, most likely. And some of the new tools also help them. If you're worried they're going to be too bad, there's a couple new tools in the game that actually would also help them kind of keep up with modern day speed. So, the first one, obviously ZOOS. We already saw this. Even with all of these cards basically still banned, other than maybe Dryden was around for a little bit of this. The deck was able to play as a hard-going second strategy that just wanted to play hand traps or board breakers or whatever, and you were just able to make ZOOS whenever you want, as often as you want, and without even having to activate any effects whatsoever, because you can always just go normal Zoo, no effect, overlay, make Borbo, attack directly, boom. You could have a 2 to 3 activation Zeus without activating a single effect like that. All you have to do is normal summon. So if your opponent doesn't have a proactive removal, basically, or negation for Borbo so it can't attack directly, they are shit out of luck, and you are going to handle them with Zeus. And so that's probably the single most powerful card that this deck is able to abuse. This is probably the greatest strategy in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! That will ever be able to use Zeus, just because of how easily they make Exceeds without even activating effects. That's so strong. Next up, the Armored Exceed package. So this is something that like Sharks is abusing. There's a couple other decks like Goblin Biker that have kind of like played around with this engine, but nothing's really been like super high tier competitive. This would maybe be the most interesting deck, again, because one monster equals a rank 4 basically turns on this whole engine by like super easily, right? Because you make the Armor Fortress, you get the trap, and then you are able to end on go into the Dark Knight. And have the trap, so you have a non-target removal on the opponent's turn. It basically makes for, one of the coolest things with it is it basically makes for a guaranteed interaction even through a 1 card, you know what I mean, versus a hand trap. You know what I mean? If you go normal summon Rat here, try to make an unbanned Broadbull, try to search in your opponent, imperms it, and you're like, oh, I mean, I guess I can try to overlay and keep playing through it. But if you know what I mean, even then you could just go Armor Fortress, search the trap, boom, you got 1 interaction through a hand trap. That's pretty good with 1 card. Now I know the deck is really scary in that regard too, because you can always just, even if they negate Broadbull, it can go red. They're basically like Link 1s, right? He can just basically keep going into the next one and still get into good material out of it. That's definitely something we'd have to watch. And something that would definitely make the deck one of the scariest, like especially versus hand traps. This is a deck that wants to face hand traps way more than it wants to face board breakers, because board breakers can definitely break this deck's back for sure. Next up, you have Utopia F-Zero or Utopic Draco Future. This card's huge as well for a deck that is able to just like churn out super like low investment rank 4s. You can really quickly just get yourself into the F-Zero package. Which is really good, because otherwise this deck may have never had any way to like handle Nibiru, which is a new card that could give the deck problems that didn't exist back in the day. But I think this card would help cover up some of that. You would basically just have to play this and the regular F-Zero. But you do need to, and we'll talk about this at the end. The last thing I want to mention here is Raziel. This is the most recent development. This package just could be good in the deck, like stuff like just playing a small package of like 3x Raziel and whatever other Raziel you want to play as the extender, just like a small package. Even Aratama, maybe even Sakitama, just basic stuff. Maybe those don't get you enough, and Aratama requiring normal summons too much, so you'd want to play the extenders more so than the normal summons. But they do just plop a rank 4 on the field for you with extra value. So I still think there's an argument that you could look at this engine and be like, this engine may be still really good. Now, it does lock you out of anything but rank 4s exactly, not even just Exceed. So you lose the Armored Exceed package, you lose ZOOS, you lose F-Zero the turn you use any of these, but still, it is still an engine I would consider, because as far as just like the raw zoo cards, those stay in the rank 4 confines that this engine locks you into. So I think that's something else that's really important to mention. So, where do we land after this? Where do we land with these cards? So, the first thing I would do, let's go one by one. Zodiac Broad Bull. This card absolutely needs to be made a hard once per turn. That's, I think, the biggest thing, because that was probably the most degenerate part of this entire deck. This is probably the most degenerate card of the whole deck, especially being a soft once per turn, being able to just consistently be like, you know what I mean, just consistently get into multiple copies of this. And get multiple searches totally for free. I even think in Modern Day Yu-Gi-Oh!, even though this card would still be really good, Zodiac has no main deck extenders. So whatever you are searching off of this is kind of just sitting in hand for the most part. The only thing you might want to consider changing, and this is more of like a future-proofing like card design, maybe you'd want to make this card only search Zodiacs instead of any Beast Warrior. Just so that way if Konami wants to, you know, just have a little more future-proof when they're looking at card design for any Beast Warrior archetype, they don't need to worry about this card being able to search basically anything. So that's the biggest thing to me. Make this card a hard once per turn. I probably think it's fine to release right now. Secondly, Zodiac Dryden. Kind of same exact idea in my opinion. Make it a hard once per turn. That way people can't be ending on multiple. I still think this card's insanely good for how easy it is to make, especially in archetype. I think make it a hard once per turn and we are good to go on this card. I really don't think there's too much outside of that going on. Zodiac Barrage, like we said before, I think this will come off right away. Not no problem. It's still a scary card. I get it. But it's just like your best starter. You know, your deck should have a best starter. And to be fair, this is the kind of archetype where, like, if this card doesn't exist, you may just have to play, like, 12 full names of Zodiacs in your main deck, which means you brick all the time on normal summons, whereas would you cut 2 or 3 of those copies and play 3 Barrage to kind of still have the same consistency numbers, but not drawing quite as many normal summons in every given hand? I think that makes a lot more sense, so I like this card in that regard. But it's hard once per turn. Like, I think it's really, really good. But I don't think it's, like, degenerate inherently. So I actually think this card's okay. And the last one is Rapier. Same idea, right? You don't usually normal summon more than once per turn. So, like, theoretically, I guess you could... Excuse me. You could make... if you're going to make a stipulation that says, like, you know, you can only gain both these effects once per turn, sure. Although it's weird because, like, the first effect is its own effect, the second effect is an effect given to another monster, so it might be more annoying to do that kind of text, but you need to make that effect that is given to the Exceed monster a hard once per turn. Absolutely. Summoning 1 more Rapier from deck, I can get behind. Summoning 2, that's too much for me. That's just too much for me. And I think for the speed of Modern Day Yu-Gi-Oh!, another thing about Broad Bull is, like, let Broad Bull search. Let him search a zoo. They can have follow-up. But, like, for Modern Day Yu-Gi-Oh!, if their board's only going to be mid anyway, and you have 1 hand trap, you don't even ash the Broad Bull. At least not on that effect. But if they made Broad Bull with a Rapier, with more than 1 Rapier in legal, that's legal, then you save it for that effect, right? And I think that's definitely what we're looking for there. So make this a hard once per turn, and I think, again, we're in a decent spot. Now, I get it. There's still some fear that the deck still may be a little bit too good, and that's still a possibility. I do think one other restriction that we need to keep in mind is extra deck space. With the speed at which Modern Day Yu-Gi-Oh! Happens, this deck is going to run through its, like, whole extra deck so fast, or at least most of it. Even if Broad Bull and Dryden with the erratas are fully unbanned, and, like, you may want 2 Broad Bull, you may want 2 or 3 Dryden, but, like, those cards go so quick because, like, you have to play a Borbo, you have to play probably 1 or 2 Tiger Mortar, 1 or at least 2 Tiger Mortar, probably 2 of Chakanine as well. So are we already talking about at least 10 slots just for the Zodiac monsters, and you're going through probably 4 or 5 of those in your first turn, and that doesn't even factor in, oh, are we going second? Because if we're going second, we're probably making a ZOOS. So there's another slot you're making that same turn. Armored Exceed package, which you're probably playing for going first. Like, you're probably using both slots because you need Armor Fortress and you need Dark Knight Lancer at the very least. So there's 2 more slots. And ZOOS potentially in this deck is more than a 1-of. This could even be a 2-of in this deck. So are we talking there's 4 slots and then F-Zero? How do you beat Nib if you don't have F-Zero? So even space also becomes a huge problem for this deck as well, because do you need 2 for F-Zero, 2 for the Armor Exceed, and 2 for ZOOS? We're talking right there, just out the gate, we're already talking 6 slots, which only leaves you 9 slots open, even for just the raw Zodiac monsters. That could be a legit problem, especially if you have to blow through 4 or 5 of them just in your first turn, just of the pure Zodiac monsters. So I think that's a low-key thing that like may get glossed over and be like, nah, the deck's still too good. Maybe the thing is, like, do people still look at Pot of Avarice? I think it's Avarice, the one that like shuffles 5 cards from grave back in the deck. Maybe it's like, do you play 1 Daiguster Emerald just to be able to reset as many as possible? I don't know, but like, those are definitely some extra things you have to consider with this deck. Is like, this deck kind of wants to grind, but can it on the level that Yu-Gi-Oh has evolved to? So I think that's one of those things that really balances out this archetype, that if you can just get past the turn 1, 2, if Zodiac doesn't overwhelm you, you may be able to just outgrind them, because the speed of the game has passed them by, and they're not going to be able to keep up and have enough tools to keep going. But yeah, there you go. That's basically where I'm at with this deck. I've always liked this deck. I've always liked the idea of how this deck plays and everything. I just was never around to really be able to play it in the way it was intended originally, because of some of these non-once per turn cards. So I would love it. Konami seems to be a little more willing to at least sprinkle a few cards of Ancient Fairy Dragon, errata unbanned, right? Summon Sork, errata unbanned. Plush Fire, how about a Firewall Dragon, right? And if it's Zodiac, then like, is there a world where they come through and they say, you know what, all Zodiacs, let's do them all at once. Like, you know what I mean? Those cards are kind of single cards on their own, but if 4 cards from one archetype are on the ban list, do they potentially look at more than one at the same time and say, you know what, as a whole, this archetype needs some help? I think that would be really, really cool. And I think a lot of players would appreciate it, as long as this archetype is like fine enough, you know what I mean? In check enough, which we can only hope for. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down below. I am not somebody who is a Zodiac expert at all. This is just somebody from the outside looking in, wishing they had ever gotten a chance to play Zodiac for real. And I want to know your guys' thoughts for modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! For modern day Speed. What do you think about these unhits and unbans, especially considering the 4 cards that are the 4 aspects that like do kind of exist that didn't exist before, that are just things that Zodiac could be able to abuse? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Please jump in the comment section down below. But I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching as always. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you later. Peace.